In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how I made this motocross cake. I'll take you step by step from carving the cake all the way down to the little details. This cake is so easy to make, it's great for beginners. I've custom made my board, so I need to make it food safe by covering it with cellophane. You don't need to do this step if you already have a normal cake board, these are already food safe. Now that the board is covered, we can start to layer and fill our cakes. I baked two 6 by 8 inch cakes, one in vanilla and one chocolate. I'm using my cake leveler to halve my cakes. I'm not going to remove the tops because I'm going to use those to carve the shape of my hill. I always simple syrup my cakes. This keeps them nice and moist throughout the decorating process. I have a video on this on my channel. Now the simple syrup has soaked into my cakes, I'm going to begin layering and filling. I've popped some buttercream onto my board first to stop my sponge moving around, and then I'm filling with that lovely chocolate buttercream. Now I'm just going to pop on the top half of my cake, and then do exactly the same with the vanilla. Just push the sponges right up against each other, and then we can begin carving. All I'm doing here is following the natural curves of the cake and removing as much caramelisation as possible. We want that kind of mound effect for the hill, so this is perfect. Now we've got the shape that we want, I'm going to crumb coat it. This just locks in all the crumbs onto the cake so it doesn't get into your fondant. It's just a very thin layer of buttercream over your cakes. Try and get your buttercream as smooth as possible, although on this cake it isn't so important as it will add definition and texture to our hill. Because our cake is curved, it's quite difficult to smooth it out with just a spatula. I use a piece of food safe plastic which you can curve and work around all those edges. Once I'm happy that the cake is smooth enough, I'm going to pop it into the fridge for about half an hour. This just allows a crust to form on the buttercream and makes it a lot easier to smooth our fondant over the top. Here I have 750 grams of fondant, which I've dyed with a green colour for our hill. Dust your surface lightly with corn flour. I don't use icing sugar as I find that this dries out my fondant a lot quicker. I'm going to make sure that I roll it out enough so that it goes over the cake and also around the edges too. Place the fondant carefully onto the cake. We can then use the palm of our hand to gently smooth it out. If you find that the fondant is gathering in certain places, you can skirt out the fondant and smooth it down in small pieces. Once I'm happy that my cake is smooth enough, I can cut away the excess fondant. To do this, I just use a really sharp knife and run it all the way around the side of the cake board. I'm just going to neaten up those edges by running it over with a cake smoother. Now we've got a really great start to our cake, but we need to start adding the details. I use a veining tool to mark out exactly where I'd like my dirt track. Try working your track from one side of the cake to the other, but allow space for any other details that you might want to pop on. I've made myself a little stencil on baking parchment of the white horse. To transfer the image onto my cake, I'm going to use a scriber needle to gently press and follow the outline. This will indent it onto my cake. I'm separating some Oreo biscuits to make the dirt track. I'm also going to be using the cream later on. I've popped the biscuits into a sandwich bag so it's easier to crush them. I don't tend to whack them with the rolling pin as I find that makes holes in the bag. Just gently tapping will crush the biscuits the same way and be a lot less messy. To stick all that biscuit onto my cake, I'm going to smear some chocolate buttercream onto my path, trying to stay between my two lines that I made. This bit is going to be pretty messy. Pop all your crumbs onto the buttercream. I try and do this bit by bit, but it still goes everywhere. I wouldn't worry though, we can clean that up later. Using a dry brush, you can simply sweep all those crumbs off your cake. Try and work towards the path and down off the cake. Using the cream from earlier, I'm just going to pop it into a piping bag with a small round tip. I want the cream to sit into the cake rather than sitting on top of it, so I just go back in with my veining tool and push a little bit deeper around that stencil that I made earlier. I'm now going to follow my design and pipe into the pattern. When I finished piping, I used a wet paintbrush to fill and smooth out the cream. For the logs on this cake, I decided to use chocolate bars. I carefully score the tops and the sides with a knife to make them look a bit more realistic. I stick these to my cake using a little bit of icing on the bottom. To add some more detail onto this cake, I've used some rocks made from fondant. There's a video on my channel on how I made these. I've used my rocks to line the path, but I've also popped some on the board around the outside. I'm using a replica model bike to go on the cake. This makes it easier than having to try and make one from fondant, as it's quite highly detailed. To help secure the bike and have it standing, I've used cake pop sticks and cut them to size, so you can't see them from behind the model. To attach it, I've used a small blob of icing, which can easily be washed off later. The last detail I want to add to my cake and add some texture is grass. This has to be one of my favourite piping nozzles, and I do get a little bit excited when I get to use it. I think it's just so clever. I dyed some buttercream using the same shade of green that I used for the cake and begin piping the grass. You can add as much or as little as you want. I usually border around the bottom between the rocks and then add smaller patches on top of my cake too. And here's the finished cake. If you like the video, please give me a thumbs up and also consider subscribing to my channel. I'll be posting more recipes as well as how-tos and step-by-step cakes just like this one.